Let's welcome Mark Devlin and say thanks very much.
Cheers, Andy. Everyone that ever introduces me is called Andy for some reason. Evening, folks. Thanks for turning out tonight. I'm holding a mic because I'm a DJ and I feel at home with a mic in my hand, so it's a bit of a clumsy way of working, but it works for me, and I'll get through it somehow. This is actually only the third talk of this type that I've ever done, and the first one was in September last year in Riga, Latvia, and at the end of it you could hear tumbleweed blowing across the plain because the kids that were there just didn't understand it at all. And looking back on the content of that talk, compared with what I've got for you this evening, it was absolute beginner's kid stuff. I can look back at it now and just see how basic it was, because I didn't understand very much at all, even a year ago, about the sort of stuff that I'm talking about tonight. So, loads of new content in this one. And to cut a very long story short, just by way of a bit of background, I've been a DJ for the last 20 odd years, club and radio DJ. I've done gigs all over the UK in about 40 odd countries around the world, for various radio shows. I've been a music writer as well, used to write for Blues and Soul magazine, a few people might remember them. And I've been a lifelong music fan as well. And that is pretty much down to Sunday bath times back in the day. Sunday night bath times. My mum, who is here tonight, used to always give me a bath on a Sunday evening when the top 40 chart countdown was on the radio. And so I always used to absorb all the pop music of the day. And back when I was 5 years old, I got into Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody first time round. And I went out and bought the records when I was 5, saved up my money, and it was the first record I bought. So from that point on, I was always into pop music, whatever was in the charts, and I just had this idea that I really wanted to be a DJ. So, as I say, cutting a long story short, bit of hustling, bit of hard work. Eventually in 1990, I got on the path to becoming a DJ. And for many years, I just went with the flow, and I did what's expected of you as a DJ, just played the tunes, played all the artists that were being presented to me by the record companies, and just existed in blissful ignorance, just going about my job like all my peers were, and not really giving it any thought as to whether there was a hidden hand involved. And in 2010, I underwent what I refer to as a conscious awakening. And that was when I came to the realization that the world and life is nothing like we've been conditioned all our lives to believe that it is. This was as a result of reading a lot of books by various different authors, not least the books of David Icke, which were very influential on me. My dad, who's also here tonight, was always into lots of different authors and subjects, and he encouraged me to be open-minded and think about things. And so in 2010 I came to this understanding that it's not governments that run the world. There's actually a cabal of elites, as they like to consider themselves, working through secret societies who are obsessed with the occult and engage in it on a regular basis, and over an immense period of time, going back thousands of years, they've come to control and infiltrate every area of daily human life. This realization coincided with other understandings about the nature of reality, the nature of life, who and what we are and how we fit into it. It's all part of a massive big picture. But as far as all this stuff goes, it was an understanding that this group of so-called elites have infiltrated and controlled governments, the banking system, the whole financial industry, educational establishments, schools, colleges, universities, all the big corporations, particularly the food and drink corporations, the military, the scientific establishment, and if you're a group of socio-psychopaths that are hell-bent on human control and you don't have humanity's best interests at heart, it would be very remiss of you to have left out the entertainment industry, and particularly Hollywood movies, the television industry, and the music industry. Because if you're going for mind control of the masses and perception management and setting norms and acceptable ways of doing things, then you are going to need the entertainment industry on your side. And of course that's what's happened. The entertainment industry, and particularly the music industry, has been infiltrated and is controlled by a hidden hand behind the scenes. Most of what they do, they hide in plain sight. And so you can go through an entire human lifetime seeing all this stuff and not realising what it means and not interpreting it. And that's pretty much what they rely on. And it's only when you start to dig beneath the surface and start to understand some of the stuff that goes on in the background that it all falls into perspective. And so that's a process that I've been through over the last 3 years or so, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. In a nutshell, the mind control manipulations of the Illuminati music industry, for want of a better phrase. So the first thing that alerted me to what was going on, or the first thing that I was alerted to, was some of the symbolism and imagery that was starting to be routinely placed in music videos. And early on, I got put onto a website called Vigilant Citizen, vigilantcitizen.com. And the guy that runs it is a young researcher in Canada. And he goes into all the symbolism and imagery that you see in videos, TV shows, movies, promotional pictures, all that sort of thing, and breaks down what they're trying to present to you and what's really going on. And one of the classic videos for this of recent times was Rihanna's Umbrella, which was a #1 record in 2007. And in it, you get this image here, which appears on screen for a split second. So blink and you miss it. There's a researcher by the name of Lennon Honor out of the US, who I've interviewed for one of my podcasts, and he went into this in great detail. He first started analysing Rihanna's Umbrella video, and he was, as far as I know, the first researcher to identify this split-second image. It's aimed straight at the subliminal mind, which of course absorbs everything that the conscious mind is not aware of, and it lodges itself in there for later processing. And that's what they're aiming at with these split-second images. This, in the video, is supposed to be Rihanna bending down into a pose with her arms outstretched. That's supposed to be her head down there. But when you study the image in fine detail, you come to realise that it's anatomically impossible to strike this pose. Everything's out of proportion, and the image is being manipulated. And Lennon Honor has put forward the view that this is actually a depiction of a demonic entity. Some people might say Baphomet. We'll be going into Baphomet later. But certainly a demonic entity that is being evoked through this video. From the same video, another still, Rihanna inside a pyramid. Pyramids are going to feature a lot as well. But when we're talking about Illuminati imagery and the symbolism that this group of elites, this cabal, like to use, pyramids feature big time, as we'll see. And there's another place that we've seen pyramids quite recently, the Olympic Stadium. Last year, pyramids with illuminated capstones all the way around the stadium. But just a coincidence. Another pyramid, another video, and another majorly controlled artist, will.i.am. I've got another name for him, but I'll keep it polite. Shil.i.am is one of them, that's quite a polite one. Former frontman of the Black Eyed Peas, well he still is I think, but going back to the days when the Black Eyed Peas were good, when they made decent music, got to go back to about 1998 for that I think. These days, will.i.am is very much a pawn and a stooge and a puppet of the industry. His music changed big time a few years ago, and it's quite clear to see that he was being controlled. This is a still from the Britney Spears and will.i.am collaboration, Scream and Shout. You've got a monarch butterfly that he's pointing to with his finger there, and also another pyramid. And there'll be more on this video and butterflies as we progress. This one is Kanye West's Power video. And this video is notable for being just one continuous image. It starts off with the camera zoomed in fine detail on some of this stuff, and then as the video progresses, the camera zooms out and you get to see more and more of the detail. But there's all sorts of stuff going on here. It's all occult. It's all quite dark, really. Some quite disturbing stuff going on. It ends with Kanye about to be beheaded, with these two characters inside about to strike him down with the swords, and that's the point where the video ends. But I don't know about you, but I remember days when videos were fun. Just artists doing stuff that was relevant to the music, and they were good to look at, and they were fun, and they were glitzy and all of that. But I just noticed that videos now are very dark and very occultic and not what they used to be. And it seems to me like there's an agenda going on. Lady Gaga, lots to say about her as well. This has been identified as a reference to Saturn. The black cross there is a standard way of symbolising Saturn. Saturn related to Satanism. Satanism, the word comes from Saturn, from a veneration for the planet Saturn, according to many. And there'll be more on that as we progress as well. This is a still from a Jay-Z video, on to the next one, from a couple of years ago. Again, it's just a mishmash of all kinds of occultic imagery and dark stuff. And I often wondered how these video makers would justify the sort of stuff that they're putting into these music videos. Because with all things, there's a cover story, there's an official version of why something is the way it is. And then I came across this quote from the guy that directed that video, onto the next one, a guy by the name of Sam Brown. And he's attempted a justification at why those images are in there. And he's talking about abstract imagery, videos can be enjoyed purely visually, it doesn't need to mean anything or make any sense. Conspiracy theory is another thing entirely. So he's not really saying anything there, but there's an attempt at a justification because there has to be a cover story. This is just more dark stuff, really. It's an image from a Lil Wayne record sleeve, and it's from his album called I Am Not a Human Being, which I think is quite a fitting title, really, when it comes to Lil Wayne. And it reminds me of Silence of the Lambs, because there was sort of cocoon butterfly imagery in that, and it was all pretty unsettling. And I just wonder why that would be on a Lil Wayne record entitled I'm Not a Human Being. And again, we have a cover story for this one. There's an attempt at an explanation as to why that image is there. The inspiration was the timelessness of Lil Wayne as an artist. The butterfly has many stages in life, represents longevity and reinvention. Okay, so seems a pretty weak-ass explanation to me, but at least they've tried. And moving on from music videos then, another thing which early on in my research I got put onto was the many hand signs and signals that you see many of your favourite artists giving off. And a classic character who you always see referenced in talks such as this is Jay-Z. You can't do a talk without mentioning him because he's a big-time player in the whole agenda. And coming to realise that Jay-Z is absolutely a controlled puppet and stooge of the music industry, and far from this rags to riches story of this drug dealer from Brooklyn that hustled really hard and made good and got a record deal and worked his way up the ladder and got corporations and did it all off his own back. You come to realise that Jay-Z's just been a stooge from the start, and he's been puppeteered by his masters, and he is the guy that has been chosen to be the #1 hip-hop artist for the last God knows how many years. That position was available, and Jay-Z has been manipulated into place. And he's played the game very well. He's done everything that's been expected of him, and he's danced to his master's tune. And part of that involves these hand signals that you see at Jay-Z concerts, that you see on promotional pictures, on record sleeves and such. The cover story is that it's the rock sign. They tell you, Jay-Z tells you, that it's a reference to, first of all, his record label, which was originally called Rockefeller Records. There's a name to conjure with. These days it's called Rock Nation. And the rock sign is supposed to be a diamond, a rock, a diamond. They're supposed to be celebrating bling culture, rags to riches. The guy made good, he's got money, we're celebrating life, it's a diamond sign. That's what they tell you. Here he is. This is David Rockefeller, head of the Rockefeller bloodline, the current head of that particular Illuminati family. He's a good-looking fella, isn't he? Yeah, they're really attractive sorts, these Illuminati types.
Die, you bastard, die!
Well, that's a thought.
We are going to have really graphic images, so you're just going to need to control yourselves. I know later there's a picture of Bono, so just going to have to be mature about this and let Mark just...
Hey, there's 10 pictures of Bono, mate. We're going in on Bono. But yeah, this guy's about 96 or something. They don't die, they just go on forever. Son of J.D. Rockefeller, the great, it says here, American industrialist and businessman and all the rest of it. But this is basically the guy who Jay-Z named his record company after. Why would he, you might think? But it's all about these Illuminati bloodline families when you come to look into it. So here's a Jay-Z concert, and this is what we see all the time. He will give the instruction to his fans to throw up your rocks, throw up your rock signs. And on instruction, of course, all the brainwashed crowd, not realising really what they're doing, throw up their hand signs in the form of what they think is a diamond or the rock sign. And actually, the symbol is in part a reference to the pyramid that we see on the dollar bill, which is the calling card of this cabal, of these elites, and has been for a very long time. They've put their calling card on the dollar bill, so you get the pyramid representing the power structure which they make up, and you have the capstone removed with the all-seeing eye in it, which is in part symbolising, well, some would say the Eye of Horus in Egyptian mythology, and also a reference to the pineal gland, the so-called third eye. And it also, the fact that the capstone is removed represents the hidden occultic knowledge that the elites like to try and keep for themselves, which is not for the likes of the rest of us. And so the rest of the pyramid represents the ignorant masses as they see them. So part of Jay-Z's rock sign is in reference to that. And we'll go on to the other bit shortly. But just an interesting aside that I wanted to put in here. Somebody alerted me to this old Duran Duran sleeve from back in the day, Union of the Snake, 1983, 30 years ago. Down the bottom there, you see an all-seeing eye. Who noticed that in 1983? And another old school sleeve as well, which is absolutely packed with all this occultic symbolism. Earth, Wind and Fire, there's actually many Earth, Wind and Fire albums that go into all this symbology. But you've got bloody everything on here. Saturn, there's the Eye of Horus at the top, there's the Seal of Solomon / Star of David / Rothschild family symbol at the top there, an Egyptian ankh, all sorts of stuff going on there, another pyramid. So here we have Jay-Z and his best mate Kanye West doing the old rock sign thing and looking very pleased with themselves. And another one. And that was Jay-Z yesterday. That's how Jay-Z looks now. That was him just on a random day yesterday. Okay, so here's the same hand signal, and it's an ancient symbol that goes back many thousands of years. And this one is being done by Anton Sandor LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan. And this was one of the favourite symbols that was used in the Church of Satan when they first got going in 1966, I think it was. So it's again a reference to that, and you come to realise that it's very far from a harmless depiction of a diamond, what these guys are doing. Why would this be? Another old school one, which people would have missed at the time, which has only come to light recently, Madonna. This is from Desperately Seeking Susan, the movie from 1985. We have a pyramid, again with the capstone removed, it's a bit dark there, but you've got the all-seeing eye in the middle of the pyramid as well on the back of her jacket. And Madonna, of course, is another big-time recruit into this whole industry cabal situation. This is Beyonce, Mrs. Jay-Z, and again, blink and you would have missed this one, but this was at, I think it was the Grammys of this year, February this year, the Grammys, or it could have been, no, Super Bowl halftime, sorry, it's the US Super Bowl halftime show, and she very quickly flashed up the so-called diamond rock sign to the crowd as the camera was panning across her. And people at the time said, oh, she was just shouting out her husband. It was just a reference to her husband's record label, The Rock. You know, that's all she was doing. There is a lot of denial when it comes to all this stuff. People don't want to see what's right in front of them, so there'll always be explanations and innocent excuses for what goes on. But when you see this sort of stuff happening time and time again, if you're approaching it with an open mind, you come to realise that there is something going on beyond what we're being told. Now this is Beyonce at the Grammys, which was shortly after the US Super Bowl halftime, and again the camera is panning around the people in the crowd, and it focuses on Beyonce very quickly, and her instinctive reaction was to throw up this hand sign, which researchers have identified as signalling 2 6s. You've got 2 6s going on, one's obviously in reverse, but 2 6 is part of the 666 whole number of the beast business. But you see that sign in quite a number of places as well. This is Jay-Z and Beyonce's baby, Blue Ivy Carter. And an interesting image that was knocked up by somebody on the internet there. More hand signals. This one is Azalea Banks doing the devil horns that you see a fair bit now as well. Another thing which you see so many times throughout the music industry is the covering of one eye or the highlighting of one eye, which again has been taken to be a reference to the all-seeing eye, the pineal gland, the all-seeing eye of the pyramid. Is Justin Bieber doing it, of all people? And a few years ago, you might have noticed that it became very fashionable and stylish for some reason for people to be photographed with one half of their face missing. And when these photographs first started coming out, I remember thinking that they just looked ridiculous. I couldn't understand why that was stylish in any way. It made no sense. But we're seeing this time and time again now with celebs and with music artists. They're photographed with just one side of their face in the frame. It's another way of depicting that all-seeing eye. Going way back, a young Michael Jackson doing the same hand signal as Beyonce, no doubt under instruction. Probably didn't know what he was doing, as he did most of his life. And here's a nice composite of Lady Gaga and Rihanna, two of the most useful assets of the music industry at this present time. They play the game, they do what they're told, they allow themselves to be puppeteered, and of course this has elevated them to the very top of their game. And people often say, in this state of denial, because who likes to admit that their favourite artists are part of something much bigger than them? Who likes to admit that maybe their favourite artists aren't as creative and individual and independent as they thought they were, and actually they're being controlled and told what to do from powers above them? It was difficult for me with Jay-Z because I've been a hip-hop DJ for 20 odd years, and I used to love Jay-Z, used to really respect him. I thought he was a very talented rapper. He still is, which is why he's been recruited, because that skill and that talent was recognised. But it was very difficult for me to come to terms with the obvious revelation that he was completely controlled. But I had to, because the evidence spoke for itself as far as I'm concerned, in terms of all this imagery and all this evidence that we're seeing. And so people often say, oh, well, you know, I can see it with Jay-Z and Beyonce, they're obvious examples, but surely not such and such, you know, surely not Justin Bieber, surely not this A-list artist. And the point is, if they're an A-list artist, they're going to be controlled, because things have reached a point where you cannot get to the upper levels of the mainstream music industry unless you allow yourself to be completely and absolutely controlled by the powers that be. I don't believe this used to be the case up until a few years ago. I believe there was still room in the music industry for artists to be creative and expressive and to pretty much bring their own skills and talent to the table. But that's no longer the case. And so you see here pretty much every major A-list artist on any of the big corporation record labels covering the eye. This goes beyond the realms of coincidence. And a lot of people that you speak to, and often when you go on chat forums or you look at YouTube comments below videos on this sort of thing, people say, no, there's no conspiracy going on here, they're just trying to look cool. It's just a fashionable way to look cool, covering your eye. Maybe it once was. But when this number of artists are all doing the same thing, and we're supposed to believe that it's spontaneous, to me it's obvious evidence that it goes beyond coincidence. It's the same thing as presidents, US presidents. People often say, oh, well, such and such a president wasn't corrupt, was he? And the answer is, well, was he president? Yes, he was. Well, then he was corrupt, because it comes with the job. Last real president of the US died 50 years ago next month. This is a site which I've found very useful for research purposes. Just for reference, it's called Conspiromedia. I think the full address is conspiromedia.wordpress.com, but you'll find it in a search anyway. The guy that runs this, who I've interviewed for 2 of my podcasts, goes right into all the evidence of the hidden hand in the music industry, and he takes it way back as well. He takes it way back to the 60s and the 70s and the very early days, and goes into great detail with his research. Great site, thoroughly recommended. As is the work of this guy, Neil Sanders, author and researcher. He's put out 2 volumes of his book, Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, and he goes into mind control of the masses, perception management, and all the rest of it. And he goes in big time on the music industry as well. So he's worth looking up. And Vigilant Citizen is the site which first put me on to all the video stuff. So that's been an invaluable one to me as well. So when I first came to understand all this stuff about what was going on with Jay-Z and Beyonce and Rihanna and Lady Gaga and all the rest of them, in the early days, I did think that it was just a modern phenomenon, that the powers that be had decided to step up the game when it came to the music industry within the last few years. And so I spent a lot of time focusing on the current so-called hip-hop and so-called R&B artists of the day, because it ain't hip-hop and it ain't R&B, what these artists are putting out now, whatever else it is. But the more I looked into it, the more I came to understand that this infiltration of the music industry has been going on pretty much since day one, since the beginning of popular music. You can take it way back to the 1950s and trace the development of it onwards. There have certainly been periods where the activity has been stepped up to quite a noticeable degree, but all this strange stuff and all this corruption has been going on pretty much since the start. The reason I've got this Elvis Presley slide up here is because somebody put me onto this recently. It's a newspaper account of him and some young female fans, but it mentions Priscilla Presley, who at the time was Priscilla Beaulieu, who was apparently just 14 years of age when she met Elvis in September 1959. And there's strong speculation that the relationship was sexual from the start. And so Elvis, having a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old, makes him a paedophile, one of the early ones. It's just something to think about in terms of the way certain artists are presented to you. The public image is often very different to what's going on behind the scenes. And so we get on to the Beatles. And there's a few strange and unusual things about the Beatles. The sleeve of their classic album, Sgt. Pepper, features an array of characters who at the time the Beatles described as our heroes. They said, these are the people that have inspired us, they're our heroes. And lurking in the back there, we have Aleister Crowley, who was described as the 20th century's most wicked man. I think he was known as the Great Beast, 666, the founder of the Thelema religious organisation, and a well-known Satanist, best-known Satanist of the last century. What's Aleister Crowley doing on the Beatles album? Very strange. Not the last time you hear of Crowley in influencing the music business. Again, going way back to one of these original Beatles sleeves, you see the group with half their face shaded and just one eye in view. Very similar to the sort of imagery we're seeing these days. Who would have noticed this at the time or thought anything of it? But when you look back in retrospect, armed with the knowledge we now have, there could have been something going on here as well in terms of control. Another image of the Beatles from Yellow Submarine, a couple of interesting hand signs going on, again very similar to what we've seen in recent times. Paul McCartney doing the old 6 sign, and Lennon doing this hand sign, which we'll also revisit shortly. So yeah, we'll reference that as we go on, but a couple of interesting things going on there. Here's Crowley again, with his famous hat and a pyramid going on there. What a coincidence. And Aleister Crowley's famous phrase, which went hand in hand with his Thelema religious belief system, was, do what thou wilt. Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. And if you go on Crowley's Wikipedia page, it will tell you that do what thou wilt is a reference to being a free spirit and following your spirit's destiny rather than being tied down by belief systems and society and stuff like that. That's not what I've heard from other quarters looking into what Crowley was all about. Most researchers that have looked into Thelema will tell you that do what thou wilt means basically do whatever you want without any regard whatsoever for anyone else or the effect that this might have on humanity. Basically just follow your own path, follow your own ego, succumb to your ego's desires, and that's what Crowley and his belief system was all about. And so isn't it interesting that we see Jay-Z wearing a sweatshirt with do what thou wilt on? It's another reference to Crowley in the music business. So he's transcending the generations here, and his influence is being felt. What has Aleister Crowley got to do with the music industry? It makes no sense. So there's the quote, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Staying with Crowley, he owned this house, Boleskine House, I believe it's pronounced, on the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland, and Crowley owned it from 1899 to 1913. And it's said that he purchased this house in order to perform the operation found in the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abra Melin the Mage. Crowley is known for going to Egypt and locking himself up in a building close to the pyramids, and through his wife channeling a spirit which is said to be that of Horus. And he apparently bought this house in Scotland to try and reenact that and bring through this spirit again. And the character that you see here is Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, who was apparently obsessed with the work of Crowley, and so he bought this house. And he lived there from the early 70s to 1991. And I've heard an account that this house was originally built on the site of a church which burnt to the ground with the congregation inside. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but as I say, I've heard the story and it's something worth considering. But anyway, Jimmy Page, big Crowley fan, and that's why he bought the house. Staying with all the strange stuff from decades past, we're still in the 60s, and this is the Beatles, and this is the famous Paul is dead conspiracy theory. Again, I don't know whether this is true or not, but a lot of people seem to go for this seemingly wild theory that Paul McCartney actually died in 1966 and was replaced by a double. It sounds ridiculous when you first hear it, but I mention it only to reflect the fact that there was all this kind of strange, odd stuff going on in the music industry back then. The theory goes, which was hatched by a bunch of American students in 1969, apparently, that on the sleeve of the Abbey Road album, the Beatles are giving you visual clues to the fact that Paul is actually dead. And it's supposed to be that from the way they're dressed, John is supposed to represent a priest, I think. Ringo is supposed to be an undertaker. George is supposed to be a gravedigger. And the theory goes that Paul is walking out of step with the others, but he isn't there. So I don't know what's going on with that one. And the theory is that Paul McCartney went off one day from the recording studio in his car in 1966 and was involved in a car accident and died, and the Beatles swiftly replaced him with a double, who conveniently was able to sing and write songs and perform just like him. So that was a stroke of luck. But you then get images such as this, and people say this is not the same person. And from these two images, the nose is certainly different. So
his new song is called Don't Look at Me. All my life, I never knew what I knew.
Well, there you go, telling you what's going on. So certainly from these two images, it does look like his nose is different. He could have had a nose job, but I don't know. Conspiracy theories are nothing new, particularly in the music game. And then, of course, most people have probably heard of this idea that the Beatles track Helter Skelter inspired the Manson murders, Charles Manson and family, to commit those horrific murders in California in 1969, Sharon Tate and co. That's been debunked by many researchers who've said that Helter Skelter is just a diversion tactic, and then other researchers that you speak to will say, no, there were hidden subliminal messages in the Beatles track Helter Skelter, which Manson and co were able to pick up on, and it instructed them to carry out these murders. So it all goes to show that it's not all about Rihanna and Lady Gaga and Jay-Z. All this stuff goes way back when you look into it. Now this guy is Admiral George Stephen Morrison, and he's the father of Jim Morrison of The Doors. And it turns out that this guy was US naval commander during the two Gulf of Tonkin incidents, which catapulted America into the Vietnam War. He just happened to be naval commander at the time. And at least one of those two events has been confirmed as a fake, a hoax. It never happened the way it was originally put forward. So it's a classic false flag, it's a classic problem, reaction, solution. is, it never actually happened, it's sort of no problem reaction solution. But how interesting that the Admiral at the time was just turned out to be the father of Jim Morrison of the Doors. And this leads into the whole business of Laurel Canyon, which is not a person, but a place in California. And it was a place where many of the influential musicians of the mid to late 60s, kind of hippie era, counterculture, anti-establishment so-called music, went to live and make music and hang out together. And a surprising number of the artists that you see cropping up at that period just happened to have moved to Laurel Canyon at this time. Jim Morrison of the Doors, there's Frank Zappa, there was the Mamas and Papas involved, Joan Baez, Donovan, loads of others. And a lot of researchers are of the view that Laurel Canyon was actually used as a kind of experimental testing ground for mind control subjects in the music industry, musicians that had undergone some sort of mind control programs. And when you look into the family background of so many of these musicians, you realise that almost without exception, they come from families with military backgrounds, military industrial complex, or they're connected to the government or the CIA in some way, the way Jim Morrison's family was. And again, to me, this goes beyond the realms of coincidence, and it seems as if something is going on here. So something else which I got put onto very early on when I started researching all of this was the issue of predictive programming in movies, TV shows and music videos. And this is where images, again usually a split second, straight into the subliminal mind, are implanted into popular culture vehicles for no apparent reason. And then shortly afterwards, an event happens, false flag or a problem reaction solution event, and it's as if the placing of the image in the video or the film was foreshadowing what was to come. And a classic example of that was this reference to Sandy Hook, which appeared in the Batman Dark Knight Rises movie of a couple of years ago. And of course, a few months after that, we had the Sandy Hook school massacre, or not, as the case may be. But this reference would appear to have no place in the narrative of this movie, and yet it's there. And isn't it strange what came to happen afterwards? And going back a few years, when you start looking at this stuff, you find multiple references to 9/11, which happened long before the event of 2001. I'm not sure which movie this is from, but there are many. There's videos on YouTube that go on for minutes and minutes and minutes, just giving you images from movies that have foreshadowed 9/11. This one gives you 9/11/01. They've even got the year. All very strange. This is the ID card of Neo from the Matrix movie. The movie came out in 1999, and on his ID card you see that the expiry date is listed as the 11th of September 2001. What a coincidence. And then we get on to some record sleeves. J. Rue the Damager is an underground hip-hop artist who's very much respected and revered by real hip-hop heads. Now, I'm of the view that J. Rue never sold out. He never sold his soul in the way that the likes of Jay-Z did, and in my view, he's still a bona fide real hip-hop artist. And so it's my view that this sleeve was put together without his knowledge or without his endorsement by the record company. It came out in, I think it was 1993, it's about 93, 94. It's called The Sun Rises in the East, and in it you can see it depicts one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center going up in flames, just like 9/11. This one is going back to 1980. It's an album by Supertramp, Breakfast in America. So we have the twin towers being depicted there, with the Supertramp logo at the top. But when you reverse the image, an interesting thing happens. You see above the buildings, the letters turn into 9/11 directly above the Twin Towers. And that was in 1980. They do tend to plan quite well in advance, these Illuminati types. This is a mad one. A group called The Coup, and this was called Party Music. And this sleeve was originally put together in June 2001, so just a few months before 9/11. And the original album sleeve was never released because, of course, the events of 9/11 ensued, and there's no way this could have been put out since. But of course, the image still exists. And I think I've got a quote from one of the musicians on this. No, I did have a quote from him. But one of the guys from the group was attempting to justify how this came about and the extraordinary coincidence of this sleeve depicting what then happened in September 2001. Interesting track listing on it. There's a track called 5 Million Ways to Kill a CEO, which is a pretty good one. So eventually the artwork to this album was changed, and the album was released in November of 2001 with a completely different image. But that one is pretty chilling, really. And this is a sleeve of Michael Jackson's Blood on the Dance Floor. And we're going back to 1997 for this one. And to me, in the background, those buildings look very much like the Manhattan skyline of New York. And you can see it's all crumbling to dust. And Michael is dancing around on a Masonic checkerboard floor with the black and white squares symbolising light and dark, good and evil, night and day, and all the other polarities that are symbolised by the Masonic checkerboard. And of course, Michael Jackson could do a whole bloody talk on Michael Jackson himself and the many strange aspects of his career and what may have been going on with him. So that's something for another talk, but lots to say there. Another amazing coincidence is the fact that Jay-Z's Blueprint album, the original Blueprint album, just happens to have been released, as you'll see at the top there, on September the 11th, 2001. Of all the dates, that was the original release date for Jay-Z's album. Who would have guessed? On the subject of predictive programming, as I say, it's not limited just to movies and TV shows and even record sleeves, but music videos as well. This is a classic recent example of a music video depicting something which a short while later came into reality, or apparent reality, according to the cover story. This is Lil Wayne's My Home Is Still video, and there's a shot in it where he's dancing around in a movie theatre surrounded by 12 skeletons. And this video came out a few days, I think, before the Aurora, Colorado theatre massacre, when 12 people just happened to be killed by a mad gunman, or two gunmen, according to which story you listen to. But either way, this goes beyond the realms of coincidence for me. Many people don't want to go there. Many people will write it off and say it's just one of those things, but it's pretty clear to me that whoever put this video together had some prior knowledge of what was going on. And Lil Wayne probably didn't even know what bloody planet he was on. I thought I'd include a lyric from this particular track because, as I said earlier, what used to be hip-hop ain't hip-hop anymore. There's lots of ways to describe it, and there's lots of things you can call it, but it sure ain't hip-hop. This is the sort of thing that's being passed off as hip-hop these days, and these are the sort of lyrics that kids are listening to, and which are being presented as where it's at. This is cool, this is great, this is what you need to be getting down to and reciting to your homies and, listening to. The lyrics speak for themselves, I don't need to repeat them, but interesting line there, I've got to put that patch over my third eye. That's quite revealing. And then we have the hook line, don't make my goons go stupid, go stupid, go stupid. Don't make my goons go stupid, go stupid, go stupid. And the go stupid bit, I think, is intended as an instruction to the people that listen to this. Because you have kids going around reciting these lyrics, and this is where we're at. That was from 2012, but it hasn't got any better. Okay, we'll take a break shortly, but before that, something else to get into is the subject of backmasking, also known sometimes as subliminal messaging. Most people have probably heard about this concept. The idea is, if you play a particular piece of recorded music backwards, you know, like you do, you get messages that you can't hear when it's played forwards. And these messages are apparently picked up on by the subconscious subliminal mind, and they're absorbed and stored for later processing. This was a big thing in rock music, particularly in the 1970s. There were stories of the likes of Led Zeppelin, and going back to the 60s, the Beatles, and Black Sabbath. No great surprise there, being involved in all this sort of stuff. But the most famous case of it was with Judas Priest. And this actually went to court in the US in 1990. The band were involved in a civil action alleging that they were responsible for the shooting of two youths, 20-year-old James Vance, 18-year-old Raymond Belknap in Nevada. The story goes that these two young guys were listening to Judas Priest's 1978 Stained Class album, and in the song Better By You, Better By Me, when played backwards, not quite sure how they managed it, they must have been reversing the record on the turntable, but it apparently includes the phrase, do it, do it. And the prosecution in this case alleged that having absorbed the phrase, do it, from this Judas Priest record, these two young guys interpreted that as, you must kill yourselves. And so they went out and shot themselves. One of them died straight away, the other one died later on from his gunshot wounds. And eventually the case was thrown out. It's thrown out of court. But it did bring into the public consciousness the idea that backmasking exists in music and that it's placed there deliberately. And I've got a personal anecdote about this, which I'll just share with you. My first proper job in the music industry was working in a radio station in Oxford called Fox FM. And I started in 1990, and basically I used to make the tea and clean the toilets and do all the dog's body stuff. And I used to pretty much live there, because I was in the studio at weekends and late at night, and I was just hanging out doing stuff and getting to know how to operate tape, reels of tape and that sort of thing. And I remember hearing on a TV show, I think it was The Word on Channel 4, there was a feature about Madonna's Justify My Love, which had just come out at the time. And this feature was going into backmasking, and it claimed that somebody had realised that if you play Justify My Love by Madonna backwards, you hear the phrase, hear us, love us, Satan. And this sparked my curiosity, and being young and foolish, I thought, oh, I must give that a go and see if it works. So, as I say, I used to work with reels of tape, long before computer hard disks. Everything was done on tape. So I recorded this track onto a reel of tape, and I reversed the tapes, put them backwards on the machine, and played them. And this was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was just me and the on-air presenter in the building, just this guy doing the show. And so I pressed the play button, and a chill went down my spine, because it really did sound as if you were hearing Hear Us, Love Us, Satan. And so I was bricking myself, and I thought, oh my God, I've got to share this with the presenter, you know, the only other guy in the building. So I went next door and I said, mate, you've got to come and listen to this, what I've discovered is, this is outrageous. And so he came in the other studio, and I went to play the tape, and there was nothing on it. It had completely disappeared. there was no logical explanation for it. The recording had just disappeared from the tape. I hadn't done anything to wipe it. It was there 1 minute, gone the next. So, a strange story there. And that's probably the first thing that sparked my curiosity about the whole business of strange stuff in the music industry. Another famous example of backmasking is Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. It's alleged that if you play a section of that backwards, you hear the phrase, "Oh, here's to my sweet Satan, the one whose little path would make me sad, whose power is Satan." And this is at the point where, when you play the track forwards, you hear the lyric, "If there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now, it's just a sprinkling for the May Queen." And when you listen to it forwards, the way Robert Plant sings it, he does say it in a strange way. He says, "It's just a sprinkling for the May Queen." Whereas a natural way to say it would be, it's just a sprinkling. But he says a. And this is the phrase where, when you play it backwards, it's supposed to say, "Oh, here's to my sweet Satan." I've tried it, and it does sound as if that's going on. The recording did actually survive this time. And I suppose people would say there's an element of you hear what you want to hear. So if you expect to hear it, you strain and you kind of make yourself believe that you've heard that phrase. But this example is actually on Led Zeppelin's Wikipedia page, and they mention the fact that this is a common theory, and they also give you a little snippet of the audio, forwards and backwards. So if you want to check it out for yourselves, go on Led Zeppelin's Wikipedia page, and you can play the reverse section yourself and see what you think. But of course, the accusation is that these music makers are deliberately encoding their music with messages which only make sense to the subliminal mind when heard in reverse. I can't say whether it's true or not, but for me, it's something worth pondering. And just a bit of a disclaimer, really, when talking about Satanism. I've made a couple of references to Satanism. I'm not coming at the issue of Satanism from any religious viewpoint. Obviously, many people's perception of what Satanism is all about is the worship of the devil, this character known as Satan, known sometimes as Lucifer. From everything that I've come to understand from my research into many different areas over the last 3 years, Satanism is all about the manipulation of energy and conjuring up dark energy and negative energetic situations. I've come to understand that everything is made up of energy, vibrating and resonating at different frequencies, and different scenarios and situations manifest into reality according to the vibrational frequency. And what the elites, the cabal that control the music industry and control everything else in life like to do with their satanic rituals is conjure up low density, very negative, very dark, energetic situations where very malevolent, unpleasant things take place. So that's my understanding of what Satanism actually is. And these elites are obsessed with it, and they feel the need to perform rituals in all kinds of manners all the time. And also, as I say, Saturn, to me, is involved. I think this might be a good point to take a break. There's a fair bit more, but I think maybe we'll take a break for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so, and then come back and do the rest.
Shall we say that?
Enjoy the beers.
I'm going to introduce Mark back in, and thanks very much for coming back. Let's say hello to Mark. Cheers, Mark.
There's a fellow I was just chatting to, I don't know where he's gone, but he's just blown my mind because he was picking up on my experiences at Fox FM. And he said to me, did you realise that Fox, the letters F-O-X, in numerology, translate into 666? hence Fox News. So there's another mad one. Anyway, loads more to get through, so I'm just going to whiz through this. Isn't it interesting how we see politicians and government officials doing the same hand signs that a lot of musicians are? There's Barry doing it. Just a little aside on that, this is something that occurred to me as I was putting these slides together. I found it very interesting that in the 1998 movie Independence Day, we had Morgan Freeman playing the US President. And up to that point, the idea of a black US President would have been a very alien concept to most people. And yet, we have Morgan Freeman in this movie. I'm sure there's been other Hollywood movies around the same time where you've got a black president as well. And it just struck me that this could well be part of conditioning the public to the idea of having a black US president, because way back then in 1998, they'd already decided on who that man was going to be 10 years later. Just a possibility. So there's Village Idiot Bush doing it. Took him all day to practice that, bless him. And he had to put his thumb there to stop the fingers from going anywhere. Not a great surprise, Hillary Clinton practicing witch, so what you'd expect really. And what they're doing with that hand signal, as are the many musicians, is evoking this entity known as Baphomet, this androgynous demonic entity which appears in the form of a goat-headed, that you see all over the place in popular culture. Why would this be? Moving on to this guy, John Todd. There's a fascinating video of his that you can see on YouTube where he's talking about spells being placed on master tapes of recorded music before they get put out into the market. This guy worked for a company called Zodiac Productions, and in the YouTube video he explains that that was affiliated with RCA, Columbia, Motown, which in turn was owned by Chase Manhattan, Standard Oil and Lloyds of London. So there's a lot of tie-ins there with many of the Illuminati corporations. And he's recounting a conversation that he had with David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. And it was years after John Todd had left the industry. And he was asking David Crosby, when he came across him years later, if they still conjure up demons to place into the master tapes of records before they go out there. And Crosby evidently replied, absolutely, they're still doing this. Apparently, most of the major record corporations have temples within their HQs. And they have altars in there, and they bring in witches, and they perform rituals and witchcraft functions on the master tapes of records, so that the logic being that a part of the demonic entity that they conjure up in these rituals goes out with each copy of this piece of music out into the public and kind of makes a connection with the consumer. So that's a fascinating video you might want to look up. John Todd on YouTube. I believe he's dead now, but this is going back to the 1970s. We get on to mind control, and specifically MK Ultra mind control. The definitive work on this, pretty much, was a book by a guy called Fritz Springmeier, who I interviewed for a podcast recently. And this book, The Illuminati Formula Used to Create a Total Undetectable Mind Control Slave, was written in conjunction with Cisco Wheeler, who was herself apparently a survivor of MK Ultra treatment, a sex slave, as was Kathy O'Brien, who's probably the most famous example of an MK Ultra surviving victim, who Fritz Springmeier has also worked with. And we find that MK Ultra, which for many years was a secret program which was not admitted to by the CIA at all, but in 1977, in a bunch of declassified documents, the CIA actually admitted that MK Ultra was real. It's gone under many pseudonyms over the years, but it basically involves trauma-based mind control. It involves subjecting the victims to horrific events which are so terrible for the mind to deal with that it shatters into different compartments which each take on an identity of their own. And the subject is left with many different personalities which have each been programmed in a different way to react in different circumstances. We hear of MKUltra being used in the case of Manchurian Candidate-style assassins. We've all seen movies where assassins take somebody out and then have no memory of what they've done, or they go into suicide programming. You hear of the likes of Mark Chapman, the guy that shot John Lennon, stating afterwards that he had no memory of it. Same with Sirhan, the guy that shot Bobby Kennedy. Famously, to this day, he claims that he can't remember anything about it. And what we hear is that these people are the victims of MKUltra programming. And it would appear that the powers that be also like to subject many prominent music artists to the MKUltra mind control treatment as well. And what they tend to like to do, as with the predictive programming that we saw earlier, is to place little visual indications into videos and record sleeves and that sort of thing to let you know what's going on, but in the sure knowledge that most people viewing it will have absolutely no clue what it means. Only a few that have studied the subject will understand the significance of it, but it seems to be important to them to place this into view. And it could well be that with the understanding they have of how reality and energy works and how you can manifest desired situations into reality by focusing will and intent on them, they're helping to empower the whole programme by getting the public's attention, albeit subconsciously, into what they're doing with these images. This one is going way back. Syd Barrett, the original frontman of Pink Floyd, rock legend has it that he went a bit mad, that he lost his mind, fried his brains on LSD, according to some accounts. But there are researchers who claim that he could have been a very early victim in the music industry of MKUltra mind control and dissociative identity programming. We see here teddy bears, and it's very, very sick because some of these things that indicate mind control relate to the innocence of childhood, because what the mind control is doing is destroying innocence and defiling it. So you often see dolls with broken limbs, and you see teddy bears, and you see things relating to childhood. And something else you see often as an indicator is mirrors, and often shattered mirrors. A division of MKUltra mind control is known as monarch programming. This again relates to multiple personalities and dissociative identities. And when you look at it, you see the monarch butterfly, which symbolises monarch programming, this very distinctive yellow butterfly appearing time and time again in record sleeves and videos. Here it is associated with Mariah Carey. And when you think about some of the prominent artists over the years and all the troubles that we hear they're having in their personal lives, just think of how many of them we're told have gone off the rails, have gone a bit mad. You might remember that a few years ago, 2001, there was a story of Mariah Carey trying to kill herself, attempting suicide. She completely went off the rails. She went out of public view for many, many months. And then a few months later, she came back, renewed, refreshed, rejuvenated career, the new Mariah. It could well be that this is evidence of mind control breaking down and needing to be reprogrammed. And you see the same names cropping up again and again. Mariah Carey was married to Tommy Mottola for a time, who was the one-time boss of Columbia Records, a division of Sony. Sony is a corporation whose name comes up time and time again in all this stuff. Some people have speculated that Tommy Mottola was actually her handler, because when you get mind control victims, they are assigned handlers to oversee them, make sure they stay with the program, and make sure they're responding the way they should be. This is painted belly art on Mariah Carey when she was pregnant, symbolising a butterfly. Interesting. Nicki Minaj. Where do you start? When it comes to evidence of dissociative identities and multiple personalities in music artists, you can't get a better example than Nicki Minaj. As I said, some of the things that symbolise mind control, and the Vigilant Citizen website is an excellent resource for going into all this stuff. One of them is doll imagery, and particularly Barbie dolls. Again, something associated with innocence and childhood. It's all deeply sick and twisted, but that's what they like to do. And Nicki Minaj models herself on a Barbie doll. And in fact, one of her personas that she likes to put out there is to call herself Barbie. And Nicki Minaj's female fans are referred to as Barbs. They love to call themselves Barbs. They're Nicki Minaj followers. So they're putting it right out there in your face. Most people don't understand what's being symbolised here. Here's a still from a video by Nicki Minaj and B.O.B. and the song was called Out of My Mind. They're not even trying to hide it. So she's got pink hair, she's in a straitjacket, in a mental cell, and on the wall you've got various demented scribblings. There's a UFO there, there's an all-seeing eye, there's a pyramid. They are us, it says. They live. How can you get more blatant? One of Nicki Minaj's alter egos is Roman Zelensky. It goes by the name of Roman Zelensky. Of course, it's a reference to Roman Polanski, the paedophile film director, the guy that made RvesvesB Baby, along with many others. If you've ever heard Nicki Minaj interviewed, you'll actually hear her mid-interview slipping into an alternative personality. She often takes on a British accent. She becomes the British girl. And it's very interesting to note that Mariah Carey and Britney Spears, in interviews, often resort to a British accent. And people hearing it think, oh, that's cute, isn't that funny, she's trying to be British, isn't it great the way she puts on that British accent? But I would suggest there's something far more sinister going on here. It would seem that they're slipping into these alternative personalities that have been programmed into them, and far more than a coincidence that all three of these artists use the British accent. But back to this Roman Zelensky character. This is supposed to be a gay male that she slips into. And she put out this song, Roman Holiday. The lyrics kind of speak for themselves. Take your medication, Roman. Take a short vacation, Roman. You'll be okay. Some alterations on your clothes and your brain. Take a little break, little break. Another clue, perhaps, as to what's really going on. Although I doubt Nicki Minaj understands what's going on because she won't even know what day it is most of the time. Here's another lyric from that same song. My flow's the sickest and I'm a lunatic. And this is the Young Money, Cash Money crew that are being put out there as the top hip-hop artists of this time. These are the people that we're told are the top of the game. Lil Wayne, Drake, and that's the real Onika Mirage when she's not being Nicki Minaj. That's what she looks like. A little bit different. And when it comes to these mind-controlled artists, you look into the kind of lyrics that the likes of Nicki Minaj are putting out there. And we'll get on to some of those towards the end. It's very easy to hate on these artists and to despise them for what they're doing. But if it is the case that they've undergone this horrific mind control, trauma-based mind control treatment, then, you know, pitying them is far more appropriate than hating them, because what we're talking about here is absolutely horrific, sick, evil stuff. And skeptics will write it off. A lot of people don't want to go there. Most people are in denial when you suggest this to them. But isn't it worth considering that that's exactly the sort of reaction that they want people to have in order that this program can go on? They're counting on most people writing it off because it sounds too fantastic, too outrageous, and so they dismiss it by default action. I think more people need to start paying attention to this, or it's just going to continue unchecked for who knows how long. I'm not happy about this going on. and hopefully other people won't be either. This is the Mickey Mouse Club, which famously included a young Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera and Justin Timberlake up there in the corner. And Mickey Mouse, of course, tying into Disney. A lot of people may well be aware that the Disney Corporation is very sick, steeped in Satanism, and is a breeding ground for some very horrific things. Disney is definitely not what it seems. And there's a suggestion that a lot of the mind control programming of your favourite artists actually goes on at Disneyland in underground bases that they've got there to carry this sort of thing out. And it's very interesting to note the number of mainstream artists that are pictured with Mickey Mouse ears. It seems a ridiculous thing to wear in a publicity shoot. It certainly doesn't look cool, but quite a large number of artists are seen wearing them. We'll see some more in a minute. This, I would suggest, is another example of what happens when programming breaks down. Britney Spears, as you'll recall, in 2007 went a little bit mad, went off the rails, shaved off all her hair and started attacking cars with umbrellas. And that was written off at the time as, oh, what's the matter with her? She's so crazy. That may literally be the case, because it seems to be a classic example of the programming wearing off. And if you recall, Britney went out of the public eye for a few months, and then she was relaunched, rejuvenated career, the new Britney, reprogrammed. Interesting situation with a court case which occurred in 2012 involving one Sam Lutfi, who was one-time Britney Spears' manager. And he got into a dispute with Britney Spears' family over some ownership issues and some copyright issues, and the whole thing went to court. But there was a very interesting quote here, which states, the judge overseeing the conservatorship, which now involves her fiancé, has ruled that she should not testify as it could potentially cause her irreparable harm and immediate danger. Seems to be some very suspect phrasing as justification for the subject of a legal case not being allowed to appear in court. Could it be that she would hear something or be exposed to something that might trigger something that shouldn't be triggered? And that was known all along. Anyone know who this is? Justin Bieber, from his trip to London earlier this year. He went a bit mad. He started putting on gas masks and, turning up late for shows and talking incoherently. People wrote it off as, oh, what's the matter with him? He's so mad. But, all the hallmarks again of what goes on with all these artists at the top of the game. Back to the Mickey Mouse ears. This is Jessie J. Of course, most of the artists that I'm talking about are American artists. You don't see much evidence of what I'm talking about here in the British music industry these days, but occasionally you see the odd little clue. So here's Jessie J with the Mickey Mouse ears. Jessie J, of course, attended the Brit School in Croydon, as did a number of other prominent British artists of this time. Adele, Katie B, Rizzle Kicks, Leona Lewis, Katie Melua, Kate Nash, Amy Winehouse. The Brit School seems to be a bit of a breeding ground for the current glut of UK artists in the way Laurel Canyon was in the US back in the day. Just an interesting thought. Marilyn Manson, Mickey Mouse ears. Don't need to say too much about him, really. It speaks for itself. Azalea Banks with a Mickey Mouse t-shirt, more of the same. And so we move on to the nice, fluffy, family-friendly subject of possession, demonic possession, or the possibility of. This is another still from the video that we started off with, Rihanna's Umbrella. And again, the researcher Lennon Honor goes into this, Vigilant Citizen goes into it as well. We have this scene here where it appears that Rihanna is turning or shape-shifting into some kind of demonic entity. Whether she is or not, it's not really the sort of thing for teenagers to be absorbing in their pop videos, I would suggest. This is another image from Beyonce's performance at Super Bowl halftime, February this year. And you can see on the image on the right there that she seems to be changing appearance in some way. It could be just put down to the facial grimace, but it does appear that there's some sort of change taking place. Beyonce's management tried very hard to get these images removed off the internet after the event, saying that they were very unflattering, which of course they are, but could they be trying to conceal something else? When it comes to alternative personalities, alter egos, Beyonce is famous for also being Sasha Fierce. She has this alternative personality called Sasha Fierce. This was covered in Rolling Stone magazine. They used the headline, "A Woman Possessed," which is interesting phrasing. There's Sasha Fierce, complete with a Baphomet dress. And there's the depiction of Baphomet again. Okay, Rain Man. While we're on the subject of possession, this is a mad one. There's this character, or this entity, that appears to go by the name of Rain Man, that has been popping up in hip-hop and R&B culture recently. So we go back to this image. Another theory as to what this represents is this demonic entity known as Rain Man. So that was Umbrella in 2007. We have this quote here from Eminem in an interview. I heard the suggestion from Andy earlier that Eminem might not be all he appears to be, but we need another bloody 2 hours to go into that one, so
Contract cancelled.
I'll leave that alone. So in the quote, he says, "My name isn't going to be Slim Shady no more Eminem either. I don't even go by my government name, Marshall Mathers. If I do come back, you know what my new name going to be? Rain Man." In a separate interview on a separate occasion, Jay-Z said, "Then I go through my Rain Man. I can't explain it to you all, it just comes out of the air for me. You start mumbling." More recently, the thing that's been setting Twitter ablaze is the VMA's performance of Miley Cyrus. Miley Cyrus then and now, or now and then. So a bit of a change. Billy Ray Cyrus must be so proud. And an interesting thing actually, Fritz Springmeier, the guy that wrote the book on mind control, was telling me in the podcast interview that the US country scene, from the very start, has been a breeding ground for mind-controlled musicians. So interesting that Billy Ray Cyrus is a part of that. Miley Cyrus is his daughter. She did the whole VMA's performance with her tongue stuck out and indulging in all kinds of hedonism and debauchery. And there's a researcher by the name of Freeman, simply goes by the name of Freeman, who's looked into this performance, and he thinks the whole tongue-flicking thing is supposed to be evoking the goddess Kali, and that the whole performance was part of a ritual. Again, we're talking about demonic possession, basically. This guy goes by the name of Dr. Luke. His real name is Lucas Sebastian Gottwald, and I often wondered who it is that creates all this spirit-crushing, intelligence-zapping, mind-numbing garbage pop music that we're getting out there at the moment. And when you look at this guy's resume, you see that he's worked with the likes of Katy Perry, Kelly Clarkson, Pink, Britney Spears, B.O.B., Flo Rida, Jessie J, Miley Cyrus, Nicki Minaj, and Rihanna. And so this guy is someone that I'd very much like to interview because I've got a few questions for him. It would appear that he's the US music industry's go-to man for creating all this mind-controlling rubbish. Notably, he was behind the writing of Kesha's song, Die Young, K-E$HA, whatever she's known as, Keisha. She put out this song, Die Young, last year, and it was a great song. It was all about, we're all going to die young, so we might as well just go out and get drunk and party because life's short and meaningless and nothing really matters. Those were the sentiments of the record. And they were aimed at teenage girls, and they were presenting the idea that this is what life's all about. Partying, having promiscuous sex, getting drunk, and just not thinking about tomorrow. Oh, and racking up credit and buying material items and brands. So Dr. Luke there co-wrote that record. Then, of course, we had the shooting at Sandy Hook, which occurred shortly after Die Young was released. And then the record company, in an act of feigned morality, decided to withdraw the track and say, oh no, this is in bad taste now, we can't have a record out there called Die Young when all these kids have just died. So they can get moral when it suits them, but of course it's all a charade. And Kesha, in interviews, claims that Dr. Luke and the other powers that be forced her to put out the song Die Young. She said she never really wanted to record it, she didn't really like the sentiments of it, but she was told to put it out there. She said this after the Sandy Hook incident. And she then allegedly wrote this record, Dancing with the Devil, aimed at the industry and her controllers. And the lyrics include, I keep on dancing with the devil, I sold my soul, it's a dead-end road. Justin Timberlake, yeah, we're into transhumanism. As I say, there's lots of stuff to whiz through here, but it all ties in, it's all part of the big picture. The elites, the powers that be, have long wanted a transhumanist society, the merging of humanity with technology. What they want ultimately is individuals to be microchipped and connected to a giant global computer which controls every aspect of your daily living. And what we're seeing in popular culture is a gradual normalisation of this idea that technology is great and technology is to be revered and technology is the future, and wouldn't it be great if we could all improve our performance as human beings with the assistance of technology. And the transhumanist agenda is being advanced big time in the music industry. And we're seeing it in all kinds of imagery. Justin Timberlake there, man and machine merged. will.i.am, who is one of the biggest exponents of this bloody awful tool of the devil, known as auto-tune. So, auto-tune is this vocal program that singers use, and it's supposed to help them to hit the right notes when they're recording a song. But of course the downside of it is it makes them sound like a bloody robot. And it first emerged in so-called hip-hop and R&B probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And it sounds goddamn awful. You're never going to meet anyone that says they likes it. All the DJs hated it. And yet, here we are in 2014 nearly, and it's still being used. How could this be? My view is that auto-tune, which makes vocalists sound like robots and sound completely artificial and mechanical, is all part of the normalisation of the transhumanist agenda. They've got their agents, they've got their puppets, and will.i.am is one of the main ones. And interestingly, we're hearing stories now of vocalists on the X Factor, when they're auditioning, trying to make themselves sound like they're using auto-tune, because they think, well, that's the way records need to sound. So if I'm going to have a hit record, I've got to sound like a robot. So they're deliberately altering their vocals to sound like they're using auto-tune. When we're on the subject of auto-tune, this guy, complete clown, complete joker, he goes by the name of Future. Check out his track, what is it called? Richie probably knows. Karate Chop. Yeah, Future Karate Chop. He sounds like Stephen Hawking's voice box with the batteries running out. Absolutely ridiculous. How this stuff makes it through, I have no idea. There's Little Wayne on A Good Day. This is from My Home Is Still, which we referenced earlier. And in it, there's a line that goes, "These hoes love me like Satan, man." And when he says that, you get this image flashing up for a split second. Why would that be in a pop record? Why do these hoes love him like Satan, man? I don't understand. Sound, frequencies, and harmonics. We are whizzing through the subjects here, but they all fit together. A lot of producers, music producers that you speak to, will tell you all about the frequencies at which music is recorded and how that can have an effect. And for many years, the standard tuning frequency for musical instruments and recorded music was 432 hertz. And this was changed during the Second World War by Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, who decided that the new standard frequency to which instruments would be tuned would be 440 hertz. And there was apparently an attempt a few years earlier by the Rockefeller Foundation, those lovely people again, to introduce it then. But it eventually came in the 1940s, and it's been the standard frequency to which instruments are tuned and recorded music is made to this day. And people that study harmonics and sound frequencies will tell you that 440 is a very discordant, dissonant frequency that doesn't vibe well with humans, and it creates a mind state which is very unsettled and not at all positive. So why would it be that a frequency was chosen which invokes that kind of mind state in people when they hear music? And there's this Japanese researcher, Japanese scientist by the name of Masaru Emoto, who has done a lot of studies into the effect that sound frequencies have on water. And what he does is he exposes water to particular sounds, and in some cases words. They don't even have to be spoken sounds, they can be written words, because the words still carry the energy of the will and the intent that the word was intended to have, whether it's spoken or written. And he then freezes the water crystals and studies the patterns that are created as a result. And he's written books on this. It's been his whole life's work for the last 20 years or so. And here are some examples of how water crystals look when they're exposed to certain words. At the top, the positive ones: compassion, thank you, wisdom, beautiful harmonic patterns and designs. Apparently, these are the words and phrases that these crystals were exposed to. Heavy metal music, I will kill you, you fool, and something I can't read there, but horrible, nasty, discordant patterns. So I can only imagine what happens to water if it's exposed to a Nicki Minaj record. It probably turns green and starts bubbling. It'd be horrible. There's another researcher by the name of Len Horowitz, and he has put forward the idea, and he's not alone, that the universal love frequency prevalent in the universe is 528 hertz. There's a website called Love 528 which breaks down the power of this frequency, and we're told that this is the love frequency that we could do well to tune into rather than the ones that are being used. But of course we're not. This is the 27 Club, and okay, that's come out of order, but never mind. Just harking back a minute to, you remember Admiral George Stephen Morrison, who's Jim Morrison's father. Jim Morrison, of course, rock legend has it, was part of the 27 Club. And the 27 Club is a group of musicians who, through the years, just happen to have died in various circumstances at the age of 27. And this brings in the common suggestion when it comes to the music industry that the corporations running the music game from time to time decide to sacrifice their own artists. It might be because the artists concerned are becoming a bit of a problem, in the case of John Lennon or Bob Marley, for example, or it might be that it's all part of a ritual and it's designed to fulfill some sort of esoteric purpose, occult purpose. But either way, we've got Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Amy Winehouse, and any number of others who do just happen to have died at the age of 27. I mention it purely because we're talking about strange stuff, so here's some more to throw into the mix. And on the idea of sacrifices, there was some very strange stuff. I didn't wake up to what was going on in the hip-hop game until about 2008. But I do remember in 96, 97, noting that there were some very unusual elements surrounding the deaths of Tupac Shakur, and Notorious B.I.G., Biggie Smalls. Because in both cases, before these artists were murdered, Tupac in September 96 and Biggie in March 97, there were record sleeve images that seemed to foretell what was going to happen. So Tupac appeared on this sleeve under the artist name Machiavelli, the Don Illuminati, being crucified. Then we have Biggie's album, Life After Death, in which he's in a funeral suit with a hearse. And interestingly, all three of Biggie's albums, the titles referred to death. There was Life After Death, Ready to Die was the first one, followed by Life After Death, followed by Born Again. And it makes you wonder whether, particularly in the case of Biggie, this was an artist that was being bred for sacrifice at some point or other, all along from the start of his career. The first album being called Ready to Die rings an alarm bell or two. And here's another guy that would have a few answers. Sean Puffy Combs, aka Puff Daddy, P. Diddy. Eyes you can trust. Hip Hop Heaven. Whitney Houston with Clive Davis, her longtime mentor of Arista Records, big time insider in the industry. He's 80-something now, he's been around for years. We had this strange incident when Whitney Houston died in the bathtub upstairs in the hotel, where Clive Davis was holding a Grammys party in her honour downstairs in the same building while she was lying as a corpse in the bathtub a few floors above. And a lot of people found it quite odd that he chose for the party to carry on when this terrible news had just broken. And some people have suggested that the party was in fact a celebration of the fact that Whitney Houston had become the latest sacrifice of the music industry. And interestingly, Whitney Houston's daughter was discovered unconscious in the very same bathtub in which she was discovered the day before, in very similar circumstances, having apparently taken an overdose and apparently nearly drowned. Guru and Solar, I'm pushed for time, so I'll pass that one. Professor Griff, who was an original member of the group Public Enemy, Minister of Information for Public Enemy. This guy has loads to say about the idea that the music industry sacrifices its artists. There's YouTube videos galore, there's interviews all over the web with this guy, and he puts forward some very compelling evidence, in my view, to the fact that this is going on. So anyone that wants to look into this whole area further, I would definitely recommend looking into the work of Professor Griff, because he's the leading authority on the idea of sacrifice, and having worked in the industry, he's got an insider's viewpoint and he's got access to a whole world of knowledge that other people wouldn't have. And he's paid the price for some of his research as well. He's been the victim of many attempts on his life, he says, including his house being burnt down. So it seems he's ruffled a few feathers, and a few people don't like what he's got to say. This is another insider's book. It was by an artist on Bad Boy Records, which was Puff Daddy, Sean Puffy Coombs' label, by the name of Mark Curry. It's called Dancing with the Devil, How Puff Burnt the Bad Boys of Hip Hop. And he's giving his viewpoint as a Bad Boys recording artist on how pretty much every single artist that ever appeared on this guy's roster has ended up broke and washed up, or addicted to some substance or other, in jail, in the case of Shine, that went to jail for this guy for many years, following a shooting incident in a New York nightclub in which Puff was clearly involved but didn't do a day of jail time, or in the case of Biggie, dead. So this is a very revealing book which exposes some of the ways that this guy works. P. Diddy is a multi-millionaire. He crops up every year on the Forbes rich list as one of the richest people in hip-hop. And it would appear that he's done a thing or two to get there. There's also another suggestion that Professor Griff puts forward, is that within the music industry there's an induction process very similar to the one that's used at the Skull and Bones Secret Society at Harvard University, that Bush and Kerry and all of them I've been involved with, and it involves lying naked in a coffin, surrounded by your peers, recounting your sexual history and masturbating as you lie there in the coffin. Griff claims to have evidence that this is what Puff went through to attain his position in the industry. Again, I can't say whether it's true or not, but that's a suggestion that's been put out there. Lisa Lefty Lopez of the group TLC, who died in a car crash in Honduras in 2002, doing the old eye thing again there. This is completely mad. It's interesting how the idea of the Illuminati has now entered the public consciousness to such a degree that you have school kids drawing pictures of pyramids and all-seeing eyes and bringing it home and saying, oh, this is the Illuminati, and I want to join the Illuminati. There's so much knowledge of the fact that there is a secret society network running every aspect of human life that this is the sort of thing we're seeing. And there was this story from earlier in the year of this up-and-coming rapper, or struggling would-be rapper, trying to kill his best friend, trying to shoot him, so that he could join the Illuminati and therefore advance his career and go all the way to the top. He'd heard that in order to join the Illuminati, you have to sacrifice someone close to you. And so he tried to shoot his best friend. And he shot the guy in the hand, and the friend struggled with the gun, and then this guy ended up getting shot. But it's a completely insane story. As is this one. A Facebook page appeared earlier this year out of Kenya, and it claimed to be the official Facebook page of the Illuminati. And it was inviting people to join. Come and join the Illuminati, they said. Sacrifice optional. I'd never thought of that, but yeah, well, Kenya again. So this is a still from Rosemary's Baby. We're back to Roman Polanski, who made this film in 1968. It's an amazing film. It's quite chilling and quite unsettling, and of course it's presented as a work of fiction. And in it, you've got a young couple, Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes, her husband, and he's a struggling would-be actor, wannabe actor, and it's set in New York in the building outside which John Lennon was shot many years later, as another coincidence. But you've got this young couple, and the guy is not having much success making it as an actor, and they fall in with a group of Satanists, and the guy gets offered the opportunity to fast-track his way to fame and fortune and success if he gives up his wife to be impregnated by a demonic entity and then to have this entity's baby. And I would suggest that coming from Roman Polanski, there's a lot of inside knowledge that's been infused into the plot line of this movie, which explains what's really going on in terms of sacrifices in exchange for being fast-tracked to fame and fortune. I would suggest that this is going on in the movie industry and the music industry. People may have heard the classic legend of the bluesman Robert Johnson, who, in the story, made a deal with the devil, and he sold his soul in exchange for fame and fortune. That, again, I would suggest, is what's going on in the industry all the time. And when we're talking about selling your soul, you can't do it without addressing Kanye West. Prime example of an artist gone bad. When Kanye West first came out as a rapper, he was a producer before that for the likes of Jay-Z. He first came out as a rapper, and his first album, The College Dropout, was a modern classic. It was full of creative, inspirational lyricism that addressed really meaningful subjects. And there came a point in his career where you could pinpoint where the turning point had happened. And he was no longer putting out positive, inspiring, creative music. He was putting out the sort of mind-numbing garbage that you're getting from Kanye West now. And I think it was probably around the time that he appeared on this US telethon in aid of Hurricane Katrina, 2005. He's there with Mike Myers, and spontaneously, off script, he said on live TV, George Bush doesn't care about black people, which is absolutely correct, but I'd probably leave out the word black. And from that point on, we have this. We have Kanye wearing his Baphomet t-shirt. We have him doing the old Illuminati pyramid sign. Here he is on Twitter in 2010. I've got a question about the Illuminati. What is it exactly? And why do people think pop stars have a membership? LOL. 2012. Illuminati, high society, blah, 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 blah. I guess he's discovered who they are. Here's some more Kanye tweets. Got a question. Can you devil worship on the new iPhone? Does Lucifer return text? It's all a big laugh, isn't it? And here's a compare and contrast. A Kanye lyric from his first album, 2003. The prettiest people do the ugliest things for the road to riches and diamond rings. And then the sort of stuff he's talking about now, which speaks for itself. Possibly the latest recruit to step up to the game, Robin Thicke. He's been around for many years, and this was him at the VMAs with Miley Cyrus a few weeks ago, wearing his Masonic striped jacket and indulging in the overall debauchery that's going on with the show, all part of the ritual. It seems Robin Thicke's been recruited. 2013 is his time. Just want to get on to some lyrics. Some of the lyrics that are going into records that young people are listening to, so-called hip-hop fans. Great, isn't it? Here's These Hoes Love Me Like Satan, man. There it is, from Lil Wayne's Love Me. That's the sort of stuff Lil Wayne is putting out there. He's being held up as like the greatest rapper of these times. Big Sean featuring Nicki Minaj, a track entitled Arse. And the hook goes, what do you believe? Arse, 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 arse.
Ass, dude. Ass.
Ass. Okay.
That's the opposite version, but it's not.
You can tell I'm from down south. If you're from up here, it's ass. And also, go stupid, go stupid, go stupid crops up again. As indeed you will if you listen to this stuff. Wobble-dee, wobble-dee, wobble, wobble. They play this stuff on Radio 1. It's unbelievable. Nicki Minaj, this one's... I mean, you know, we can have a laugh about it, but look at it. I mean, kiss my arse and my anus because it's finally famous. And then... My mother's here, I don't want to say this stuff, but look at it, look at it. This is what's being put out there, and who is Nicki Minaj's target audience? It's teenage girls. It's girls of 12, 13 years of age. I've got 2 young daughters. How much do you think I'm looking forward to them growing up and listening to stuff like this? Now this gets played on the radio, and what they do to make it acceptable for radio play is they'll delete one syllable. So instead of saying pussy, it'll be pussy. And instead of fuck, it'll be k. And by deleting the middle syllable of k, it's deemed acceptable for radio play. You'll be hearing it on Radio 1, 1 Extra, Kiss FM. That's what we've come to. And I know I'm sounding a bit like a fire and brimstone preacher here, but come on now, you know, basic human morality it doesn't allow you to think that this sort of stuff is okay. If you hate it, you just need some pussy. Yeah, okay. Well, that's Birdman $1 Million Pussy. That's the title of the record. This, we're told, is where hip-hop is at. Jesus, what happened? Miley Cyrus, another heroine of teenage girls everywhere, she admitted that in her song We Can't Stop, she's singing about ecstasy. And we've got this whole trend now in music coming out of the US where they refer to Molly. And Molly is a new slang name for MDMA, i.e. ecstasy. We're very familiar with that in the UK, but they seem to have just discovered MDMA in the States. And so you've got all these references to Molly. We have Rihanna in a video, again a split-second freeze frame. It actually says Princess of the Illuminati, putting it out there in plain view. Little Wayne on a good day again. Dr. Dre has made a fortune out of his Beats by Dre headphones. Here's an ad campaign for it, in which, inexplicably, we get 3 6s popping up. How nice. And in that one as well. What reason could there be for this? And Dre is always top of the Forbes rich list in hip-hop as well. It would appear we know how we got there. Oh. I told you we had Bono to come. When we're talking about shameful, sickening sellouts, we have to address Bono. If you judge a man by the company he keeps, then where do you even start? All the usual suspects, there they are. What a card he is, eh? What a laugh. Or laugh if you come from up here. Bono. What a guy. Okay, we're starting to wrap up now. Something we've not discussed so far is the influence of the Rothschilds. And when you're doing any kind of presentation on secret societies and cabals and Illuminati and the manipulation of human consciousness and human society, you can't leave out the Rothschilds. So recently we had Rick Ross, who stole his name from a famous drug dealer by the name of Freeway Ricky Ross, and apparently the original Ricky Ross wasn't too happy about it. But this Rick Ross is really William Roberts, and it emerged quite recently that he was actually a correctional facilities officer in the US prison system, which he probably didn't really want to come out considering he's posing as a gangster rapper, but it did anyway. So here's Officer Roberts with the cover for his Black Bar Mitzvah album, and interestingly, he's cavorting inside the Seal of Solomon, Star of David, Rothschild family emblem, depending on your interpretation of the symbol. And does anyone know who this is? It's not Phil Mitchell. It's Boy George. He's changed a bit, hasn't he? That's Boy George, and on the top of his head, for some reason, he's got the same symbol. Could he be symbolising who owns him? The Rothschilds? Who knows? Quick reference to this. This is a letter which emerged last year, and it made all the hip-hop press at the time, and a lot of people claimed it was a hoax. There's never really any way of knowing whether it's a hoax. Of course, there's always going to be people that claim that things are. But it was from a music industry insider, allegedly, who in the early 90s was part of one of the big corporations. And he got called to a meeting along with the heads of all the other big music corporations of the time. This was in 1991 in Los Angeles. And he says that they wheeled in this guy that nobody had ever seen before, and he introduced himself as a representative of the US private prison industry. And he explained to all these heads of the music corporations that they were in an absolute crucial position in being able to manipulate and mould young black males into pursuing criminal lifestyles by the glorification of certain ways of living. And the idea was that through music, which some people might call gangster rap, it's been labelled that, these corporations would encourage a whole generation of young black males to pursue a criminal lifestyle, which would result in the US private prisons having a constant supply of inmates, thus making the individuals that run this system very rich and ensuring their continued survival. And this guy, he never revealed his identity, but he claims that he was absolutely outraged by it, dismayed by it, and he walked out of his job, and only 20 years after the event did he feel confident enough to tell the story. So again, people must make up their own mind as to whether this is genuine or not, but it does sound plausible. And remember this guy? This is a more recent, not the most flattering picture. This is a more recent apparent example of an insider. This guy popped up on YouTube a few weeks ago claiming to be one Robert Connors of the US Department of Defense. And he claimed that he had inside knowledge of how the music industry was being used to mind control and manipulate the public according to a much wider agenda. And he claimed that he was going to unleash devastating material which would reveal how this was being done. And at the end of this video, which you can still get on YouTube, he played what purports to be a recording of Michael Jackson shortly before he died, on the phone to a friend, claiming that he knew he was going to get killed. Similar to what Diana did back in the day with her friend. This guy claimed that a week after posting the video, he was going to unleash this devastating evidence, but he never did. It's not been forthcoming, nothing more has been heard of from this guy. He might be propping up a flyover somewhere, but I suspect that it was a hoax. And what we're seeing now is a lot of hoaxes coming from official sources to try and debunk researchers that are getting a little too close to what's really going on out there. We're seeing in all walks of the so-called conspiracy arena. There have been 9/11 hoaxes that have come out recently, and this one, I suspect, was put out there from official sources to sow confusion and sow dissent, get people arguing, and take people's eyes off where they should really be focusing on. That's my view on what this one was all about. So, the other big music genre that is favoured by generations of young people all over the world is what's these days being referred to as EDM, or electronic dance music. It's basically house music, club music, that's been around for 20, 25 years in the UK, but it's just being picked up on in certain other parts of the world. And if the powers that be have done such a successful job in infiltrating hip-hop, R&B, pop music, you would imagine that they would also want to have a finger in the pie of EDM as well. And so I've noticed there's some interesting imagery starting to crop up in EDM circles. Paul van Dyk, one of the biggest DJ producers out there, is using this intriguing logo in the form of a crop circle. Looks like an inverted pyramid. There's bound to be some occultic significance to it, which others will pick up on. And this is the symbol for a big dance music festival in Belgium called Tomorrowland. Interesting use of phrase again, and we've got the all-seeing eye in the middle of that one. So it seems the dance music scene is being infiltrated now as well. Why would you leave it out? So just starting to wrap up then. So far, given that we've talked about mind control and demonic possession and all the rest of it, you might think that all of this is pretty much doom and gloom, very negative, and of course it could be perceived that way, but I'm not going to end on that note, because I always want to end on a positive, inspiring note, and put out there the point that things don't have to be the way they are right now. The only reason things are the way they are is because people have allowed it to happen. People have allowed it to get this way. We've got the power of free will and choice, and we're living in incredible times now where all kinds of truth and all kinds of knowledge and all kinds of revelations are coming to the surface, and they just weren't there before. And we've got this awakening of human consciousness, and we've got an understanding of these great truths, and we've got the opportunity to apply our power and our free will and our choice to make things better. And I'm confident that that's what's going to happen. What it takes is people, first of all, facing up to the fact that this stuff is going on, and then undertaking not to make any kind of energetic connection to it, just to not involve it in their lives. With all this garbage music that we hear on the radio and in clubs and all of that, you don't have to be listening to this stuff. Good music is still being made. There's real artists out there. If you dig beneath the surface, you can find it. Don't play into all this stuff. This statement really resonated with me. If not now, then when? If not you, then who? And recently in an interview, I was asked, why are you doing all this stuff? Why are you putting this information out there? Why, it must be detrimental to your career. You must be burning bridges doing this. And I thought about it for a minute, and I just said, well, I've come to understand that all this stuff is going on. I'm in an ideal position to put this information out there to others so that they can make of it what they will. Given my background in the industry, hopefully what I say will carry some credibility and some relevance rather than if somebody else had said it. So if that's the case, why am I going to say, oh, I don't want to do this, somebody else can do it? And I don't want to be saying, oh, I'll do it in a couple of years, it doesn't suit me to do it right now. If not you, then who, and if not now, then when? I just decided that somebody needs to say all this stuff, and now is the time to say it. And I think we're going to see some incredible times in the next few years. I think a lot of things are going to change. A lot of people are going to face up to these truths, uncomfortable and unsettling as they may be. The truth isn't always convenient, but it's always the truth. And we can make a difference just by applying our will and our intent to it. And that's what I feel is going to happen. I just want to mention the fact that in less than a month's time, we've got the People's Voice TV and radio channel launching. That's Devlin's project. It's going live on the 18th of November. TV and radio, 24 hours a day, online. I'm going to be doing a show each week called The Sound of Freedom. It's a 2-hour conscious music showcase. And it's the place to go if you want to hear real music by real artists who are addressing the many subject areas that the People's Voice is going to be going into, from the conspiratorial and the angry and the confrontational to the spiritual, uplifting, inspiring. Going to be doing that each week on that channel. So something to look forward to there. And just to finish, my website for all my other output is markdevlin.co.uk. I've got an ongoing podcast series which goes under the banner of Good Vibrations, and that's where I'm interviewing a number of interesting guests about all manner of things. Fritz Springmeier's on there, Lennon Honor's on there, I've got Ian R. Crane, I've got Andy Thomas, Max Egan, a whole bunch of interesting speakers on there. Was there anything else I wanted to mention? I don't think there was. I think that's it.
Right, little plant there, we'll wait. We've got about 5 minutes, so I didn't know if anyone had any questions.
Happy to do questions if anyone's
I use
got
the
one.
back of their arm. Somewhere over the rainbow imagery,
Well, no, this Q&A session is going to be quite quick because, in a word, no, sorry.
Next question.
No further information, so...
rainbows, or like when we have the X Factor, we have Shane Ward singing somewhere over the rainbow. I think they use those rainbows, and that's why the doctrine when we're small about the rainbows, like Devlin and the whole of the rainbow. They'll flash those up when they want us to follow a certain path, like following records of Shane Ward, to go to the Olympics. They're always flashing these images and they want you to buy things and they put rainbows.
Yeah, I've not come across that at all, but it's interesting stuff. No, but something else to research there.
No, I did ask the question of what was his concept of the rainbow.
All new to me, but thanks for it. Still.
Another question. Sorry, you mentioned earlier about the guy who shot his friend who accepted Illuminati. I've got a friend who believes that there is a kind of acceptance thing where they have to sacrifice a blood relation or blood relative, such as Kanye West, his mom,
Dr. Dre's brother.
Dr. Dre's brother, Michael Jordan's dad. Exactly, yeah. And Jennifer Hudson, the whole family died.
Yeah.
So you said it's quite ridiculous. Do you believe they have to do that?
He brings his mum and dad with him.
Keep an eye on them then. No, I can't prove that this goes on, but you have to go with what resonates with you and what feels right. And it feels absolutely plausible to me that this sort of thing goes on. You know, there's some very suspicious circumstances surrounding Kanye's mum. Here one minute, gone the next. And he loved his mum. You know, it was well known that he adored his mum. And Dr. Dre's brother, Jennifer Hudson's family, as you say, it certainly appears plausible to me. It sounds ridiculous to people when they first hear it, but, you know, I've put all the evidence out there that I can. People have to make up their own minds, but I know what I feel about it.
Did you notice on one of your pictures that Alistair Crowley looks like old Professor?
Actually, he does, yeah.
Yeah?
He looks like Boy George these days as well.
That he looks like old Professor. And on one of your pictures where you saw, who was that girl who was doing that?
Beyonce.
Yeah, you said it was 2 6s? The other 3.
Yeah, I had that pointed out to me at the break, but yeah, I see it. You got the 6 and then the 3 fingers, so 6 to the power of 3. Yeah.
And also, David, like, ex-wife was that as well. Teaching on the internet.
Or Pamela. Pamela, yeah. That would figure.
Thank you for your talk. I've kind of been looking into this stuff for quite a while, and what I've been really interested in this sort of debate about psychology is whether it's sort of trying to actually influence people, mind control, things like that, and on the flip side of whether it's simply there for the sake of communication between people who are sort of putting that similarity there. And so I'm just wondering if you've got any kind of viewpoints on sort of, you know, where you can draw the distinction between the two, whether you think both is going on. Is the symbology there for a purpose to influence people? Or is it just simply there for...
I've found, looking into all this stuff, and I don't just look into music industry stuff, I look into the whole arena of conspiracy, so-called, and spirituality and all the rest of it. The powers that be seem to like to do things for more than one reason. There's usually a main reason, and then some subsidiary reasons, which are kind of bonus. And my view with the symbolism is that it's enabling the public that are seeing these symbols to make an energetic connection with the symbols and the will and the intent that they're charged with, which of course is malevolent and negative, without them realising what's going on. But I also believe that there's an element of communication between those that know what's happening. It's a kind of secret coded language. And I also think there's an element of rubbing people's noses in it, rubbing researchers' noses in it, because there's going to be a small number of people that look at these symbols and they're like, I know what's going on here. This is satanic, bloody occult symbolism in a pop video. But the powers that be know that the vast majority of people won't see that. And so those few that can are just having their noses rubbed in it. It's like they're saying, yeah, what? you know what we're doing, we know what we're doing, that lot don't, and they never will, what are you going to do about it? I really do feel they're kind of playing mind games with us. But that's going to change.
Hi, Mark. It's interesting that most of your focus was on hip-hop and not rock music. I wonder if rock and metal is less prone to manipulation because it's coming from a more underground level and there's more of a sort of close culture, positive culture amongst sort of metal fans and whatever. Whereas hip-hop tends to be very materialistic in its basis, and I'm wondering if that's why perhaps rock music hasn't been manipulated.
Well, hip-hop's very materialistic now, but it wasn't always that way in the early days. And the reason I focus so much on hip-hop and R&B, so-called, is because that's the type of DJ that I've been for the last 20 years. So it's the music that I know the culture, so I can speak more on that than I can on rock. I've never really studied rock music. But I think rock music was quite clearly infiltrated in a much more major way in the 1970s and probably into the 80s. And what we've got now is just hip-hop being the fashionable music of the time. And so the emphasis has shifted from rock to hip-hop, and they're putting all their energy into that. That's what the kids are listening to. In 10 years it might be something else, it might be EDM, in which case more emphasis will get put on that, I feel. But yes, they're in rock music, or has been, for sure.
Should we not?
Are we done?
Oh, no, there's one more question.
One more.
I know, that's going to be
Whatever up to Run DMC? That's the last one on.
Well, that's an interesting one because
That was a really crazy, didn't it?
well, one thing that I didn't mention in the sacrifice section, or at least the section of prominent artists who just happened to have died, is that Jam Master Jay, who is one of the original founding members of Run DMC, was shot, murdered in a recording studio in 2002. I think I'm right in saying the case has never been solved, or they've never pinned it on anyone. But yeah, Jam Master Jay was taken out. So the remaining members of Run DMC are still out there, but it ain't the same as it was. Not that I've heard of, no. Anything is possible.
We've got to wrap it up, so I want to just say a big thank you to Mark for coming out and bringing his mum and dad and travelling all the way.
I say Baphomet, we'll be going into Baphomet later. But certainly a demonic entity that is being evoked through this video. From the same video, another still, Rihanna inside a pyramid. Pyramids are going to feature a lot as well. But when we're talking about Illuminati imagery and the symbolism that this group of elites, this cabal, like to use, pyramids feature big time, as we'll see. And there's another place that we've seen pyramids quite recently, the Olympic Stadium. Last year, pyramids with illuminated capstones all the way around the stadium. But just a coincidence. Another pyramid, another video, and another majorly controlled artist, will.i.am. I've got another name for him, but I'll keep it polite. Shill I Am is one of them, that's quite a polite one. Former frontman of the Black Eyed Peas, well he still is I think, but going back to the days when the Black Eyed Peas were good, when they made decent music, got to go back to about 1998 for that I think. These days, will.i.am is very much a pawn and a stooge and a puppet of the industry. His music changed big time a few years ago and it's quite clear to see that he was being controlled. This is a still from the Britney Spears and will.i.am collaboration, Scream and Shout. You've got a monarch butterfly that he's pointing to with his finger there, and also another pyramid. And there'll be more on this video and butterflies as we progress. This one is Kanye West's Power video. And this video is notable for being just one continuous image. It starts off with the camera zoomed in fine detail on some of this stuff, and then as the video progresses, the camera zooms out and you get to see more and more of the detail. But there's all sorts of stuff going on here. It's all occult. It's all quite dark, really. Some quite disturbing stuff going on. It ends with Kanye about to be beheaded, with these two characters inside about to strike him down with the swords, and that's the point where the video ends. But I don't know about you, but I remember days when videos were fun. Just artists doing stuff that was relevant to the music, and they were good to look at, and they were fun, and they were glitzy and all of that, but I just noticed that videos now are very dark and very occultic and not what they used to be, and it seems to me like there's an agenda going on. Lady Gaga, lots to say about her as well. This has been identified as a reference to Saturn. The black cross there is a standard way of symbolising Saturn. Saturn related to Satanism. Satanism, the word comes from Saturn, from a veneration for the planet Saturn, according to many. And there'll be more on that as we progress as well. This is a still from a Jay-Z video in the music industry. Because if you're going for mind control of the masses and perception management and setting norms and acceptable ways of doing things, then you are going to need the entertainment industry on your side. And of course that's what's happened. The entertainment industry, and particularly the music industry, has been infiltrated and is controlled by a hidden hand behind the scenes. Most of what they do, they hide in plain sight. And so you can go through an entire human lifetime seeing all this stuff and not realising what it means and not interpreting it. And that's pretty much what they rely on. And it's only when you start to dig beneath the surface and start to understand some of the stuff that goes on in the background that it all falls into perspective. And so that's a process that I've been through over the last 3 years or so, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. In a nutshell, the mind control manipulations of the Illuminati music industry, for want of a better phrase. So the first thing that alerted me to what was going on, or the first thing that I was alerted to, was some of the symbolism and imagery that was starting to be routinely placed in music videos. And early on, I got put onto a website called Vigilant Citizen, vigilantcitizen.com. And the guy that runs it is a young researcher in Canada. And he goes into all the symbolism and imagery that you see in videos, TV shows, movies, promotional pictures, all that sort of thing, and breaks down what they're trying to present to you and what's really going on. And one of the classic videos for this of recent times was Rihanna's Umbrella, which was a #1 record in 2007. And in it, you get this image here, which appears on screen for a split second. So blink and you miss it. There's a researcher by the name of Lennon Honor out of the US, who I've interviewed for one of my podcasts, and he went into this in great detail. He first started analysing Rihanna's Umbrella video, and he was, as far as I know, the first researcher to identify this split-second image. It's aimed straight at the subliminal mind, which of course absorbs everything that the conscious mind is not aware of, and it lodges itself in there for later processing. And that's what they're aiming at with these split-second images. This, in the video, is supposed to be Rihanna bending down into a pose with her arms outstretched. That's supposed to be her head down there. But when you study the image in fine detail, you come to realise that it's anatomically impossible to strike this pose. Everything's out of proportion, and the image is being manipulated. And Lennon Honor has put forward the view that this is actually a depiction of a demonic entity. Some people might
Let's welcome Mark Devlin and say thanks very much.
Cheers, Andy. Everyone that ever introduces me is called Andy for some reason. Evening, folks. Thanks for turning out tonight. I'm holding a mic because I'm a DJ and I feel at home with a mic in my hand, so it's a bit of a clumsy way of working, but it works for me, and I'll get through it somehow. This is actually only the third talk of this type that I've ever done. And the first one was in September last year in Riga, Latvia. And at the end of it, you could hear tumbleweed blowing across the plain because the kids that were there just didn't understand it at all. And looking back on the content of that talk, compared with what I've got for you this evening, it was absolute beginner's kids stuff. I can look back at it now and just see how basic it was, because I didn't understand very much at all, even a year ago, about the sort of stuff that I'm talking about tonight. So, loads of new content in this one. And to cut a very long story short, just by way of a bit of background, I've been a DJ for the last 20 odd years, club and radio DJ. I've done gigs all over the UK in about 40 odd countries around the world, for various radio shows. I've been a music writer as well, used to write for Blues and Soul magazine, a few people might remember them. And I've been a lifelong music fan as well. And that is pretty much down to Sunday bath times back in the day. Sunday night bath times. My mum, who is here tonight, used to always give me a bath on a Sunday evening when the top 40 chart countdown was on the radio. And so I always used to absorb all the pop music of the day. And back when I was 5 years old, I got into Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody first time round. And I went out and bought the records when I was 5, saved up my money. On to the next one from a couple of years ago. Again, it's just a mishmash of all kinds of occultic imagery and dark stuff. And I often wondered how these video makers would justify the sort of stuff that they're putting into these music videos. Because with all things, there's a cover story, there's an official version of why something is the way it is. And then I came across this quote from the guy that directed that video. On to the next one, a guy by the name of Sam Brown. And he's attempted a justification at why those images are in there. And he's talking about abstract imagery, videos can be enjoyed purely visually, it doesn't need to mean anything or make any sense. Conspiracy theory is another thing entirely. So he's not really saying anything there, but there's an attempt at a justification because there has to be a cover story. This is just more dark stuff really. It's an image from a Lil Wayne record sleeve, and it's from his album called I Am Not a Human Being, which I think is quite a fitting title really when it comes to Lil Wayne. And it reminds me of Silence of the Lambs, because there was sort of cocoon butterfly imagery in that, and it was all pretty unsettling. And I just wonder why that would be on a Lil Wayne record entitled I'm Not a Human Being. And again, we have a cover story for this one. There's an attempt at an explanation as to why that image is there. The inspiration was the timelessness of Lil Wayne as an artist. The butterfly has many stages in life, represents longevity and reinvention. Okay, so seems a pretty weak-ass explanation to me, but at least they've tried. And moving on from music videos then, another thing which early on in my research I got put onto was the many hand signs and signals that you see many of your favourite artists giving off. And a classic character who you always see referenced in talks such as this is Jay-Z. You can't do a talk without mentioning him, because he's a big-time player in the whole agenda. And coming to realise that Jay-Z is absolutely a controlled puppet and stooge of the music industry, and far from this rags to riches story of this drug dealer from Brooklyn that hustled really hard and made good and got a record deal and worked his way up the ladder and got corporations and did it all off his own back. You come to realise that Jay-Z's just been a stooge from the start, and he's been puppeteered by his masters, and he is the guy that has been chosen to be the #1 hip-hop artist for the last God knows how many years. That position, and it was the first record I bought. So from that point on, I was always into pop music, whatever was in the charts, and I just had this idea that I really wanted to be a DJ. So, as I say, cutting a long story short, bit of hustling, bit of hard work. Eventually in 1990, I got on the path to becoming a DJ. And for many years, I just went with the flow, and I did what's expected of you as a DJ, just played the tunes, played all the artists that were being presented to me by the record companies, and just existed in blissful ignorance, just going about my job like all my peers were, and not really giving it any thought as to whether there was a hidden hand involved. And in 2010, I underwent what I refer to as a conscious awakening. And that was when I came to the realisation that the world and life is nothing like we've been conditioned all our lives to believe that it is. This was as a result of reading a lot of books by various different authors, not least the books of David Icke, which were very influential on me. My dad, who's also here tonight, was always into lots of different authors and subjects, and he encouraged me to be open-minded and think about things. And so in 2010 I came to this understanding that it's not governments that run the world. There's actually a cabal of elites, as they like to consider themselves, working through secret societies who are obsessed with the occult and engage in it on a regular basis, and over an immense period of time, going back thousands of years, they've come to control and infiltrate every area of daily human life. This realization coincided with other understandings about the nature of reality, the nature of life, who and what we are and how we fit into it. It's all part of a massive big picture. But as far as all this stuff goes, there was an understanding that this group of so-called elites have infiltrated and controlled governments, the banking system, the whole financial industry, educational establishments, schools, colleges, universities, all the big corporations, particularly the food and drink corporations, the military, the the scientific establishment, and if you're a group of socio-psychopaths that are hell-bent on human control, and you don't have humanity's best interests at heart, it would be very remiss of you to have left out the entertainment industry, and particularly Hollywood movies, the television industry,